welcome back to the Relationship Manifesto podcast series. My name's Chris Smith, Shambles Guru, and I'm with Dr. Stephen Whitehead, academic, author, relationship coach, and researcher. Stephen, is that the right order to put them in?
Yeah.
Are you an academic before an author, or?
Well, if I hadn't done the academic research and the writing, and then I couldn't have done the. If I hadn't done the academic research, I couldn't have done the writing. And the writing and my own life experiences that brought in the relationship coaching. So the relationship coaching has been more recent.
Yes.
Well, a bit less 5 years or so, but whereas the academic bit, that goes back a long way.
So maybe it should put in there sort of lifelong learner and or sort of because it's your experiences that you bring into this book, aren't you?
Yeah,
as well as the research, you are actually bringing. Is that right? Your personal experiences to this?
Yeah, and I'm reluctant to bring in names, but of course, yeah, I've had my relationships, had my moments, and that's all been factored in different ways. But also talking to many men and women. Their experiences of relationships, how they've changed, and this has all part of the book.
Yeah, and this is episode 11. This is the 11th podcast, and we're on chapter 10 of the book. The last chapter actually was called "Always Be Honest." I just want to clarify. There was a comment in the blog, relationshipmanifesto.posterous.com, about my avatar. And I have an avatar which I designed in Second Life, a 3D online virtual world. And I'd like to just reply, keeping in mind, always be honest, that I did design my avatar to look just like me in the real world. So no, you're not supposed to laugh at that. That's how I see myself in the real world.
Okay, that's different. Okay.
And the only difference is our age. You know, he's about 4 years old now. And I'm still in my early 30s. So this chapter, moving on now quickly before anybody replies to that, this chapter is, to be honest, I don't know how we're going to spend 30 minutes on this one. So, silence is golden sometimes, right? Okay, your elevator pitch.
Well, the idea that silence is golden is one of those persistent, myths that goes that's been with us through time immemorial. It's okay, silence is okay, but I want to make the point that what makes us fall in love, that's the key question underpinning this chapter. What is it that makes us fall in love? We might be attracted by looks, but it's words that drive love. It's words and communication that we fall in love with, the words of the other person. And that just gives a very, very strong indicator to the importance of communication, and that's what this chapter's about. Okay.
So it's words. So it's all about, what is it called when you romance, you meet somebody for the first time and you romance them? It's courtship. So it's all about courtship, is it?
Yeah. Courtship is important. It's that time when we are making an effort. As I said in the previous podcast, great to make the effort. Don't rely on romantic gestures. Don't make the effort to the point that you're pretending to be someone that you're not. Make the effort in a truthful way, but don't stop making the effort. You know, courtship probably shouldn't end in a way. I think the idea of courting someone is that we've courted them and then we've caught them.
I never thought of that. That's an interesting.
And having caught them, then we don't have to make the effort. And the biggest catch, of course, and many men have complained about this over the centuries, probably, is that I got married and then, the sex was poor, or she wasn't such a good cook as I thought, and women complain, well, I married him, but he doesn't wash his teeth in the morning, his feet smell, and all these little things that get in the way of a relationship. But the point is that the courtship needs to go on because we change. So the actual fact that you are courting someone and you've got to a point where the relationship is building well, but don't assume that then the courtship has to finish or should finish, or even it's desirable that it finishes. And I'm not necessarily talking about romance, because the problem with romance is that it often gets locked down into or reduced to almost petty habitual gestures. And I'm thinking now of so many times I've been in the UK. You know, you get some guy. It's a Friday night. It's about 6 o'clock. It's raining. He's driven up to Tesco, filled his car with petrol, and there's a flowers outside the petrol station. And he's rushing out. He just grabs a bunch of flowers, and that's his. It's okay, you know.
That could be nice. It's okay. That's a nice gesture.
It is, but okay, do it, but don't let that replace the courtship, because the courtship has to go on, and the courtship comes through words.
Okay.
It's as I've said to you, or I've said in a previous podcast. You know, modern woman is a very different type of person to the one of even 30 years ago. She's independent, she's articulate, she's well educated herself, she's probably financially independent, and she's probably quite clear about what she wants and what she doesn't want from a man. And one thing she doesn't want is petty habitual romantic gestures that have no meaning or little value behind them. That what she's looking for is someone who can communicate. She can communicate with.
I think we're moving off this chapter, aren't we? Because that's reflecting back on an earlier chapter. What you just said.
Well,
is it?
It is, but it's coming back to this point about communication, where silence is golden, but only sometimes. Sometimes it's good to be quiet, and the best time to be quiet is when an argument's building. That's the time to be quiet. You don't fuel it, and you don't get angry. You don't get frustrated. You don't, and if there's a hurtful thing said, you back off. That's the time to be quiet. That's the time when silence is golden, and you let it cool down. The rest of the time, communicate, share, be open. Words are the building block of all relationships. They're the building block of all friendships. They're the building block of society, social networking, communication. The written, spoken word are what hold us together. They're what make us human beings, and they're certainly what make us lovers, husbands and wives and partners. So I'll give you an example of another myth is that the absence makes the heart grow fonder. Well, yeah, but we all know what's going on there, because absence makes the heart grow fonder because the person's not around. But when the person comes back, we've got a problem. So you often find that.
Sorry, and the problem is?
Yeah, well, the problem is that the person's changed, and then you're having to reinvent the relationship all over again. You know,
but that depends on the length of absence, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm not thinking of just a few days, or I'm thinking of where there's been a long absence. The idea that absence is generally absence makes the heart grow fonder, but it's the heart is playing the trick on us then. It's tricking us into this, because if we are away for a long period of time and there's no communication,
which is unusual in this day and age, because one of the big things with technology is the communication is there.
Yeah, communication is there, and an email is fine, and those are social networking phenomena, but it can't. And Skype is a big one, I know now, but it cannot replace the face-to-face, the intimacy, the warmth that comes from being physically close to someone.
Yes.
And while absence can make the heart grow fonder, it does so by tricking us into creating an illusion of what that person is who's no longer with us, or not with us at this moment. And then when that person comes back, we find there's a discontinuity between what our imaginations think is conjured up with this absent person and what this person's like who's now standing in front of us. In actual fact, when we are apart for a long time, we've got to find out about each other again, because in some way, not totally.
Can you quantify how long is a long time?
3 months.
If you're away for 3 months?
Yeah, I think 3 months is a big period to be away, and certainly any longer than that, you've got to start all over. In some way, you've got to start all over again. You've got to go back a few stages from where you left off. You've got to build it back up again. And the way to do that is not to be angry that the person's somehow slightly different from the person that left 3, 4, 5 months ago.
Yes.
But accept that you've also changed. And the only way you can get back to where you were, I'm assuming where you were was a good place, is through communication. You've got, you share your experiences, and you get back into that building up the building blocks of the relationship through talk.
So this is a slight tangent. So distant relationships, like boyfriend girlfriend. I remember a million years ago when I was boyfriend girlfriend university stage. My girlfriend's I've just got a job and requires me to go to London.
Sure.
And we'll visit once a weekend or something like that. Are they guaranteed to be? That's a doom scenario.
I think being away for a long time is just it's a big risk. I mean, it works for some of the couples, but to be away out of each other's presence, out of each other's sight,
Let me ask the specific then. What about all the people in the armed forces?
Yeah, I know.
How? That's not a nice scenario to be if you're a soldier. It doesn't matter what sex it is because it's male female, right?
Sure.
And you're going off on a tour of duty that lasts for 6 months. How is your marriage strained when that happens?
Well, if we want to talk about the armed forces and situations of combat that go with that, I don't think any of that is natural. I don't think it's natural for men to be in the armed forces, and I don't think it's natural for men or women to be put in the position where they're expected to kill. Having said that, we all know that there are circumstances, unfortunately, where that is required of the armed forces. But it's traumatic. That's the point I want to make. It's not a natural situation. People aren't natural born killers. Most aren't anyway, and it's got to be forced. So the consequence of that is that no matter how much an individual might love the armed forces, the culture and the setting and the physical challenges that it gives us, the point is when it comes to trauma that often goes with being in the armed forces, and it can also go with being a firefighter or being a policeman or woman as well. The emotional trauma that goes with that is very, very difficult to deal with, and that's where you get men and women, particularly men, obviously coming back from conflict. They really need help and counselling to get back into a sort of a mundane routine of ordinary domesticity.
So coming back
very,
from
very
that
hard.
Long-term absence conflict could have a positive side to the relationship as well as a negative, or is it always negative? Well,
I can't see much positive for a man who's been put in a situation where he's having
woman,
put in a situation where he's having to kill, or she's having to kill, or be killed, and then come back to just washing the dishes on a Saturday night and going out for a meal. It's very hard. It's a massive transition, and to expect people to slip back in to ordinary life without any help. I mean, I don't think the armed forces. I think the armed forces now are much more aware of this and provide more support for the uniformed services than they did in the past. Certainly, for example, during the Second World War. But it is very difficult, and I think coupled with that particular trauma, it's the absence. Then the only way you can do it is through communication. But often if people are bottling their feelings, if people don't want to talk or uneasy to talk or feels they've not used to doing it, they're not got in the habit of sharing their thoughts, that can be very hard. And the important thing here also is the issue of reflecting. We go through life and we experience situations, and that's okay, but it's reflecting on that experience that's the important issue. It's reflecting on what did I learn from that? What went right? What went wrong? How do I feel about this situation? How do I feel about?
But reflecting as an individual, or reflecting with your partner?
You have to reflect. You have to reflect. Importantly, you have to reflect with yourself. Reflect with yourself. But if you can do it with your partner, that is great. That is really positive. If you can look at the situation, you can both sit down calmly and reflect together. It might be some domestic situation. It might to do with your children. It might to do with a house. It might to do with parents. It might to do with work. If you can do that calmly, without fighting, without argument, without rancor and bitterness, your relationship's good.
But it doesn't have to be silence, because so long as you can keep the self-control when you're having, if you are debating something with your partner, there is a danger of you. It's a type of questioning, because there is sort of threatening questions you can ask and threatening responses, or there's emphatic. There are different types of softer responses as well. So, and that comes with wisdom, I think, and your own confidence and your own. You act grown up, and you don't take umbrance at something that's critical of you, and you're not negatively critical of the person you're talking with. So, but that's not silence. That's just being. In fact, it's also active listening skills, isn't it? It's
absolutely. Silence is important. There's times for silence and time for talk, but the most important thing is the reflection, and the reflection comes when neither party wholly blames themselves or wholly blames the other. There's always a duality here. There's always a correspondence going on between two individuals or more than two individuals, particularly in a family situation. It's very complicated, and there isn't a single answer to it. There isn't a single right or wrong solution. It's often you can get by just by letting your partner talk to you and sharing what they feel, their anxiety, their fears, their insecurities. And once they've got them out and spoken them, they're often gone. They disappear like balloons into the sky. They're away. They're not hanging around. They're not become leaded. You're not carrying them. You let them out, and you can only do that through communication, through talk. But the reflection thing is absolutely key. And the time to be silent is when you're listening.
It's active listening skills, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I remember as a young teacher, being sent on active listening skills sessions, and for me, it was actually it's not so difficult now, but it was actually very difficult then not to butt in or not to transfer my own prejudices onto the person that I may have been counselling or I may have been working with.
I'm not going to. One of the things I'm not going to do in this book is criticise other books, but I'm going to make an exception on this case.
Is it whether it's positive or negative criticism?
This is a negative criticism, and it's important because this book has had an enormous impact on people's perceptions of male and female, men and women. And the book is John Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And the problem with the book, although it contains a lot of good sense, the problem with the book it rests on one particular fundamental premise, and that is that women and men fundamentally communicate differently. That there is a natural imbalance within the sexes which can't be bridged easily, and John Gray's book offers a way of interpreting what women really mean when they say this and what men really mean when they say that.
Yes.
And I want to. I mean, there's been many books now that have come out that challenge that concept of the innate inability, if you like, of the men and women to communicate together. Men and women can communicate very well. It's the listening skills that you need.
It's not a translator you need.
It's not a translator.
Yes.
You just need to listen, and you need to reflect, and you need to be calm in the doing of all that, and to do it in a way which is conducive to calmness, not anger, not stress. There's no magic. This is not magic. It doesn't need you don't need a psychologist. You don't need a PhD to understand this. It's very, very simple.
Yeah, but you do need willpower, because it's not easy to not interrupt. Did I say that right? Did that come out right? Yeah, I think it did.
Yeah.
It's not easy to not interrupt, is it?
Particularly if you're feeling defensive, particularly if you feel that there's an accusation there inherent in it, or particularly if you're feeling guilty, or if you're feeling tired. Advice about communication is avoid communication when you've had too much to drink and when you're tired and when you're stressed. We live increasingly tense lives. We're working longer hours than ever before. We're travelling often in very even the travelling can be very stressful. Commuting. So
that's very practical advice.
Money issues that get in the way of all this.
Yeah, that's very practical advice, isn't it? Don't attempt this. communication when you are drunk, when you are out of control.
Well, if that's the point, if some people, you can come back home, a couple of glasses of wine or something, it might be okay, but for others, it's not, and all that happens is that you create an environment where maybe you want to talk, you want to relax, and part of that relaxing with your partner is to talk and have humour and sharing, But
some would say, I drink, have a couple of glasses of wine, and I feel more relaxed.
Fine.
My inhibitions disappear a bit, and I'm more willing to talk.
You always have to remain in control. You haven't got to let your emotions run away with you, and you have to.
That sounds like you're being very mercenary.
It's being very practical.
But isn't it being very mercenary? Like, am I? And in the last podcast you mentioned this, didn't you? About playing a role where you're not really you.
Well, if alcohol can create a situation where you aren't really you actually are influenced by the alcohol, and you relax in a way which is almost artificial. It's not you talking; it's the beer talking. It's a common enough phrase which you hear. So just be wary. It's fine to relax, but there's a line. You don't want to go too far with the. With that, it's a good time to talk is not last thing at night when you're both tired, but first thing in the morning when you've woken up, you've had a good night's sleep, and to plan your day so you can just maybe lie in bed and have a cup of tea and just talk. Before you've got to rush off to work, or you've got to catch the train to the office, or whatever it is you've got to do. And taking time out, don't feel. Often another thing that can happen in relationships is that relationships which are a bit flaky, they avoid dealing with issues by filling the diary. Now, what happens is that couples who are maybe going through a difficult patch, they avoid it by making sure they've all got friends around. Yes. They're always going out and with other couples. There's always a party or a dinner party or something, and they're okay to a point, but ultimately it's about you and your partner. There's got to be times when you and your partner can just be together without anybody else.
Yeah, it's a bit like that old teacher scenario. I'm so busy doing my job, I don't have time to think.
That's right. Often with a relationship, you're so busy with all the rest of life, you don't have time to talk.
Yes.
And as I said, it's absolutely important that you do talk and you reflect on your experiences together and you share. Because that's what it is. I'm not saying we talk at people. You're not giving a lecture to your partner. You're sharing. You're sharing everything, your feelings, your hopes, your anxieties, and all the good times.
Yes. So breakfast really is the most important meal of the day now. You've taken me off at that tangent because you said good time is when you're rested and you're.
I think couples will work it out for themselves, but the only thing about that, why I say the early morning is because you've rested, you've had a sleep, and it's your mind's clear. But often if we're slotting into the routine of the day, we're thinking about what's coming next, about getting to work.
Yes, your head's all there already.
Yeah, your head's in work.
Sounds like romantic weekends away is the solution. Do you think?
I think romantic weekends away are great, and those sorts of romantic moves are positive, and don't do them quite often. The other thing I would say about communication is that something that's often overlooked in relationships is that the way we communicate at work can get translated to the way we communicate at home, and this is a danger. I want to give you an example of a person who's a manager or a leader, high-powered, got a lot of responsibility for the people, having to deal with decisions, making decisions, important decisions constantly through the course of a day. Now that person, male or female, and it doesn't make any difference, this scenario works across both genders, but that person has got to play a different role when they go home. They've got to be somebody different when they go home. They cannot go back home and be the senior manager, the CEO, the executive, the headmaster, headmistress, or whatever. They can't do it, because if they try it, that's not communication. All they're doing is carrying on. It's an inappropriate role with their partner.
Yes.
And that requires us to be aware of coming down off that platform, coming down out of that mode of behaviour, relaxing into the home. The home's supposed to be the place where we do relax. The home's supposed to be our private space, our precious space. We protect it.
A space where you're not threatened.
A space where you're not threatened.
Yes.
Now, in a balanced 21st century family relationship environment, there isn't one leader over the other. There isn't one manager and one follower. There is two people doing it together in a harmonious and reflective way.
But that's
and
the
it can
theory.
be done like that.
Isn't that the theory? That's the theory, but is it the practice?
It's not the practice for many relationships. That's why we've got so many breakups.
Yeah.
And we've got, when people are in these high-powered management positions that they might aspire to as a career moves, they've just got to learn that they've got to be someone else at home. It's not good to be transferring that sort of behaviour back home to someone. It's not a way to build intimacy and love, and it's certainly not a way to conjure up sexual desire.
I'd love to know what the listeners are thinking of this. I'm thinking of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's here's my work presence and here's my real presence. But maybe we don't follow that one out. No, let's not follow that one. Let's try and stay on task.
Yeah.
For educators, for teachers, and for parents, is there any practical advice you could give to them, especially if they had kids? If they're trying to help youngsters take on this sort of silence is golden sometimes philosophy, or whatever we would call it. What practical advice would there be to support younger people coming up, or maybe even peers? I guess.
I think one of the things I'm struck with is the incidence of underage sex, and by underage I mean under the age of consent, under 16, and it's highly common. It'd be no good criminalising all the 14 and 15-year-olds in the UK or anywhere else who are having sex. We'd have to build 5,000 more blinking prisons. But we've got all these young people having sex, and by having sex they are in a relationship and they are emotionally exposed. They are in a degree of intimacy. They are exposed because they can experience rejection. They can experience feelings of love, no matter whether you call it puppy love or whatever. It's very real if you're 16 years old. There's all sorts of anxieties that go with it. I don't think we're teaching it enough. I think we have to, and this is both the educators and the parents. We've got to, maybe we lay too much emphasis on sex education and not enough emphasis on relationship education. We're not teaching about it. We assume it's just going to work out. But it's pretty
obvious why. It's very easy to teach the sex education side.
We can stay with the mechanics of it.
Yes, but to be honest, so some of the education systems, they are trying to address that. They are trying to address the emotional issues. They're trying to address the gender issues, stereotyping. I saw a wonderful program on Channel 4, I think it was in the UK a year ago.
Yeah,
they were really addressing the stereotypes.
Yeah,
and I thought it was and it's on the internet.
Yeah,
and just do a search.
There's some great stuff on the internet now with that.
Yeah,
absolutely,
where they do with the children would in a very open way, which amazed me. Amazed me in a really nice way. But you're right. It is easier to teach the mechanics. It's not easy to teach the emotional and the prejudices and the stereotypes.
I think we can teach kids how to control themselves, control anger. I think we can do that, and I think we can do that without recourse to pills. I think one of the big dangers that we've got now in society, we're giving young kids too many pills for what we call behavioural problems.
Oh yes. Yeah.
That worries me. And once you start down that path with someone about 8 years old, then what state are they going to be when they get to 38? people have to learn to cope with their emotions, their feelings.
But any practical advice on that? It's easy to say we have to teach kids to deal with their anger. Have you got any practical?
I would do role play. I think if you do role play in the classroom, is great. Where you put children into a situation maybe they are going to be challenged, but in a safe environment, overseen by the teacher, and then you get situations where you talk to children. Well, look, then you're being defensive. Why are you being defensive? What's the situation? What's being said here? Why is that word or that phrase hurtful to you? And why did you respond like that? So you do role play, and as an example, you look at these situations that arise, and the sort of words that people use to describe each other, describe their friends. I would like to see a lot more unpicking in the schools of what we've talked about before about these subgroups. I know schools in the UK, for example, they have subgroups. Nerds is a very common one, and that's very common in many places. But nerds are outcasts, normals, cools, outsiders. I'm not talking about cultural groups like emos. I'm talking about groups where the kids in the classes.
Sorry, what is an emo?
It's a particular type of cultural group. A sort of, I don't know. I mean, it's a sort of a type of punk, if you like, that we saw in the 70s, but it's moved into something which is less aggressive. It's an emo is often androgynous as well. That's another interesting. But anyway, moving off, coming back to that point, is that looking at these subgroups now they're active, and how the children or the kids are relating to that, and the sort of pressures that they're feeling as a consequence of that. Getting to talk to them again, getting the kids to talk. Not always talking at them, but getting them to open up. I think one of the reasons why education is so crucially important, but why it's also can be very boring for children, is they don't get a chance to express themselves. They're being talked at.
I want to ask you about the cultural aspects of role play. You know, role play in a Western classroom is probably easier to do than role play in a Asian society classroom. But let's not follow that one up, because
it would be very difficult to do it here. I have to say, I couldn't see it happening.
More difficult, certainly. Well, no, I know. I have to give credit to a lot of Asian teacher colleagues who some of them are doing some brilliant stuff, and I so admire them, especially when they're doing brilliant stuff with class sizes of 60, and how they survive that. I so admire what they do. I really
very,
do.
very hard. But I think it's just anger management is so key to a relationship. It's if you've got anger that's constantly erupting, often over trivial matters, then give you an example. I mean, this has been said to me many times. A woman said to me, "Look, Stephen, I'm in a relationship. I love my husband, but it's got to the stage. It's like walking through an unexploded minefield. You're just so nervous about what to say next, because you know it could just touch off a mine."
Yes.
And up we go again. I got to the point where I would try and go around smiling all the time. Even when I felt miserable, I did this in order to make sure he was happy and therefore calm. What an awful situation to be in. But you can imagine that happening. Yes. And there's many relationships like that. And often anger is, I'm not saying that anger is solely a male issue. It can be an issue for women as well. But we know if there's anger coupled with the threat of violence, that's not a relationship.
Sorry, did you just suggest that the men, if there's an anger issue, it's usually an anger on the man's side more than the women's side?
I think with men you often get bottling up.
Is this a term, emotional bottling?
The term, both men and women, you get this notion of emotional bottling up. Yeah, where the woman who was going around talked about smiling all the time. She's controlling herself. She's performing a role in order to keep her husband bottled up. She's afraid of her husband erupting, out of control. Yes, having a blazing row or worse as a consequence of that. So she's constantly trying to manage that situation. Yes. The worst case scenario with that is where the woman feels that she's actually under physical threat of violence. Yes. From the man. But just taking the violence factor out, just the fact that there's always the threat of a row over something. The dinner's cold, or I've come home late, or the central heating's broken down. I don't know.
Yes.
Whatever it might be.
Yes.
It's that's not conducive to good communication.
Yes.
It's one person's trying to control through. They've learned to have to try and control because one person can't control their anger, the other person can't control their anger.
Yes. Actually, we've not only spent the 30 minutes on, which I didn't think we'd take up on this topic, we've gone well over it again. What have we missed in this chapter, or is, how would you sum this up?
What I would say is for many people, if I want to stay with this point about anger for the moment, I would say if there's real anger in a relationship and it's not being dealt with, you have to go and see a specialist. I think you need to talk to a third party, and you need to talk to a specialist counsellor about it. You have to seek outside help to stop the cycle, but that can only be done if the other important factor here is the one I mentioned earlier. It's where the person who is being angry, who's blocking the communication, and blocking the sharing as a consequence of the constant anger, they've got to reflect on themselves. They've got to be able to be brave enough and strong enough to say, well, okay, I know I've got a problem. What am I going to do about it?
Yes.
But you see, the other thing about anger is the good news. It's not biologically driven. It's often a result of stress, disappointment, anxiety. It can be
financial problems.
It can be financial problems. It can be all the little minutiae of relationship life that build up, and one person is coping with it okay, and the other one isn't. So why is that happening? Again, it comes back to this fundamental point that's central to this particular chapter: is it's communication, talk, and finding the time to do that. Taking time out, making space in your life so you can keep the building blocks of good words, positive words, there all the time.
Yes. One of my personal coping strategies as far as anger is concerned is if I ever feel myself getting angry or frustrated, I ask myself one question, and it's a very simple question. Is it life-threatening? I'm very serious about this. Is it life-threatening?
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, up to now it's been no. I'm sure maybe one day it will be yes. And if it's not life-threatening, then I'm a fairly intelligent human being, and I can work my way or our way through whatever it is that's causing that anger or frustration.
That's right.
But it's it's one of my two guiding lights throughout my whole life. And I mentioned the other one, which was in an earlier podcast, was the realization that I am biodegradable. But those three things, is it life-threatening and I'm biodegradable, seems to sort of calm me down on most issues. And I think on that point, we could come to an end, yes,
okay,
on
Chris,
that.
Yeah.
Silence is golden sometimes. And a reminder, the blog is at relationshipmanifesto.posterous.com. Please leave your comments there, which would be brilliant. Actually, we're actually on episode 11, aren't we now? This is chapter 10. So there's only 2 chapters to go.
It's 2 chapters.
Two chapters to go.
It's going for indefinitely. I think.
It's gone really fast. Although for listeners, we have been talking, and we may actually pick up on some specific issues and extend the podcast series a little bit. So we'll see how it goes, and keeping an eye on your comments as well, whether you'd want that to happen. Mind you, everybody has every relationship has its day, and maybe the one between Stephen and I with this podcast, we weren't open with the agreement at the beginning. We should have signed a contract, a prenuptial podcast contract, right? But episode 12, the next podcast, which is chapter 11 of the book, why do you have to be perfect? Is what we'll address there. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I really am enjoying these conversations.
Yeah, me too.
They're really they're interesting, and we've been fairly open. I think. Well, we've got a worldwide potential audience here, so we're being fairly open.
We are, yeah.
So I hope you've enjoyed that, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much. See you next weekend. Have fun.